Okay, we are back. So what we have now is we have a joined layer that has the total population, and then we also have it reprojected into the same coordinate system as your crime data and with fixed geometries. And then we also have the crime data. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to use this joined layer and I'm going to count the number of crimes or the number of times crime has been tagged. Based on what polygon it's in. So for example, if I was to go down here, right? So I've got these two here. So this one would probably have two. Now with some of these ones, you will end up finding that they're drawing over top of each other, particularly the ones that are in the center of the county. So, but basically it's going to go through this particular one is going to go through and it's going to count how many of those crimes exist for each of those counties. So to do this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back over to my processing toolbar and I'm going to type in points to polygon. So if I start typing in points to polygons, what's going to crop up under vector analysis, that's the one you want, is count the points in a polygon. So that's what this is going to do. So it's going to go through and count every single point in here, and it's going to attach it. So if I double click on it, it pops up with the toolbox. So in this case, I want this polygon to be the joined layer, right? I want to get all of this data in together so I can run analysis on it. So I'm going to do that. For my points, I've got my crime tags. That's the one I want there. Now, if you have things that you want to count out individually or any of those sorts of things. So weight field is very common for population. Like if you want to weight pollution that is higher to be more valuable, you can do that. Class is, let's say there was different crime types, which won't work for this particular data set because the only thing that was tagged was the place, not the crime type. But if, for example, every single crime type, this is very true in modern data, you want to classify it out that way, then it would be there. Now, what you're going to want to do here is you're going to say count field name. So count field name, this is what it's going to call the attributes. So remember for total population, right now it's labeled as AG3001. That's what it's going to be called. Right now, if you don't change this, your crime data or the number of times that place was tagged in the crime letters is going to be called num points. Now, this is fine if you remember that that's what it's called. If you aren't going to remember, then maybe you want to put it as something like crime tags. Now, in the fields, you don't want to have spaces and you don't want to have dashes. GIS software does not typically like it, so we're just going to have this as an underscore. Okay, so I'm going to do this as crime tags, and then in this particular case, this is going to be probably one of the later ones that I'm going to do. I'm actually going to save this one out. So I'm going to go to this three buttons over here, and I'm going to say save to file. Now this is going to automatically put me wherever the last one was. So last time I was dealing with seagrass. I'm going to go over to, in this case, my mapping freedom tags here, and I'm going to say that this was the count of crime tags by county. That's what I'm going to call this one. It doesn't really matter what you call it, just call it something that you're going to remember, and in particular, call it something you're going to remember in about 6 months. Because you never know when you're going to come back to this. So it's all fine and good now where you're like, oh, I remember that it is extra data set 1, 2, 3, but then in 6 months you're like, wait, was it 1, 2, 3, 1-2? Like, which one was this? So just make sure that you're doing that. Now, this is very common where it says no spatial index exists for the points layer, so the performance is going to be degraded. Basically, what that means is that it's going to be slower because there's no sort of index that has been developed for this. So if you get into far more advanced GIS stuff, you can create indices that will allow this to be optimized in terms of how it runs. But until then, we're just going to do it this way, and we are going to say it is totally fine. So I'm going to pause this until it finishes running. All right, so now that it's finished running, you can just shut this one down, hope that it ran correctly, and then you can now see that I've got this dark green one that says count of crime tags by county. So I'm going to open up the attribute table to make sure that this has run correctly. So if I go over to the far right hand side, I can see that I have a whole bunch of these with zeros, so that's fine. If I double click on it again, so if you double click on any of these, it'll load things low to high. So that's what I'm going to do now. So now I have that Hinds County has 64, and then if I double click it on it, whoop, there we go. Then I've got Warren County, Sunflower County, Lawrence, and so on and so on. So you can see that it did in fact run. If there are zeros all the way across, this is probably where you had issues with something like a projection. So make sure you go back and reproject. It will not have run if there are geometry issues. It'll just throw an error. So you have to make sure that you do those. So if you're not 100% sure, go back and do those projections. Go back and make sure that everything is in the same layer or is in the same projections and things like that. So now I've got this count of crime tags by county. I'm going to right click on this join layer. I'm going to get rid of it. I don't need this one anymore. And I'm going to get rid of this reprojected one so that yet again, I'm just not mucking up. So I'm only dealing with the things that I actually want. Okay, so what I'm going to do now, because I still want to see, I need to do more analysis to see whether or not there's relationships or same hotspots of different things. What I'm going to do is I'm going to right click on this one. I'm going to go back to the attribute table. So we already had this crime tags one here and this AG3001. Now this AG3001 I mentioned before is a text format, and unfortunately there's not a very simple way to adjust that. So what we're going to do is we're going to actually create a new field and call it population and tell it that it's going to take this population from AG3001 and just move it over into that, but as a number format. So what we're going to do is we're going to click on this abacus here, and it's going to say open field calculator. So we're going to do that. So with this, you can create a new field or you can edit an existing field. In this case, we want to create a new field because editing an existing field won't let us deal with changing the field type. So what we're going to do here is we're going to call this population, and I'm going to keep this as an integer. That's fine. I'm not going to deal with partials. I'm going whole number people. And then in here, you can do a variety of things. So you can do Python code in here. You can do, well, so if you're dealing with ArcGIS and Esri, you can do arcade code. You might be able to do arcade code in Q. I've never actually tried it, but Python is usually the more reasonable one. But you can also just do simple things. Like I could do like 2 + 2, and it would do this. What I want to do here, though, is I already said that I wanted to pull the information from that population, the AG3001, into this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over to fields and values. That's about midway down, and it'll have all of your different fields here, right? So now you've got this one that says AG3001, so that's the one that I'm going to work with. So I'm just going to say AG3001, that's what I want. I'm going to go OK, and we're just going to call her a day. We're going to call her good here. So now what you can see is I've got population here, and now it's all on the right-hand side. So now I have population, now I have crime tags, they're both numbers, and so that means that I can work with them. I'm going to right-click on AG3001 and just hide it. I don't want to deal with that now because I have this one that's called population, so I don't want to confuse myself later on. And you can do that with any of these, right? So if I don't need the centroid of your counties, I can right-click on those column headers and hide them, right? So I can do that with whatever I want. But just be sure that, you know, you don't do that necessarily too much. You still want to have things particularly like GIS join and the name of the county and those sorts of things. All right, so then from here, I've got, because I did that, this edit mode will have been toggled. You want to toggle this editing mode off so that you save it. So if I toggle that editing mode off, it's going to say, do you want to save the changes? And you say, yes, I do. So now it doesn't matter if your things crash, if anything happens like that, whatever is done in this data is done. So I can just open up a new project and load this data set in, and it'll be totally fine. So anything that you do to the data that gets saved into the data is saved for the data. It's not necessarily going to be saved in the map unless you save your project, so saving the actual like QGIS thing, but this will save the actual data. And so it doesn't matter, I can load it into any different thing and that'll be totally fine. Okay, so now I've got that. So I have all of these different bits here. So now I have all of my data joined together. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to switch over to the next video. The next video is going to deal with doing spatial autocorrelations of your data so that you can see those. And then the video after that is going to be how to make your data pretty, basically. How do we make the data look the way we want it to, or as close to the way we want it to as you can get. So that's what we got, and I'll be back here in a sec.